ask you a question. What do white people do wrong, Larry Elder?
What do you mean? What do white people do? I'm not worried about white people. I'm worried about what's going on with us.
But if there's systemic racism in this country, which we know it is.
No, I don't say there is. You say there is. I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't believe there's
No,
systemic
there
racism?
used to be, obviously. Tell me what you think the number one systemic example of systemic racism is in America.
Oh man, there's so many.
Just give me the most important one you think.
At the top of mind, I'd probably maybe say mass incarceration. Maybe.
Really? During the Great Depression, when 50% of black adults were unemployed, you didn't have this kind of mass incarceration.
Black man who is a father to his children, and I'm
Right.
a happily married
Right.
black man to a black woman. So I'm never going to argue with that part, But I just feel like everything is black with you. Black is wrong. Black people do this and black people do that. And when I asked you what white people do wrong, you said you're not worried about white people at all.
I'm talking about the damage, disproportionate damage going on in the black community.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about this fascinating interview that I stumbled across between Larry Elder and The Breakfast Club. And you guys already know what's coming, right? You know how The Breakfast Club treats GOP candidates when they come on the platform to talk about issues such as race, okay? They want to play the boo-hoo, black people are victims, what about the white man card, right? That's what they do in this interview here with Larry Elder, who's clearly going to talk about the biggest problem in America, and by extension, black America as well too, which is fatherlessness. Okay, fatherless homes is the biggest problem in this country, and I tend to agree with him. And he's going to list out facts about what's happening in black America, and that's going to trigger the Breakfast Club because, again, they can't stand to have a conversation about the problems with black people in black America without somehow, some way trying to rope the white man into it and blame the white man for all of black people's problems in this country. So without further ado, let's get it.
So the question is, what do you bring to the table?
You said MAGA.
MAGA.
Okay.
And the answer is, I bring a lot of issues to the table that I feel our side is not talking enough about, if at all. For example, the number one social problem in America, by far, is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home, married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What's happened? In the mid-'60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. When I say this to people, the pushback I get is, well, there are lots of things that are going on, systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 71 years old. A young black man in that demo is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents, drownings. It's not until they get to number 4 that death is the cause. In America, 60% of the shootings, the robberies, and the homicides are committed by black people, often against other black people. Of the homicides in this country, half of them are black victims, almost all killed by other blacks. How do you explain that if it isn't for the absence of fathers? Are you prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime? I doubt it. And the go-to reaction often is poverty and systemic racism. Here's the problem. 1940, when there was blatant racism, this is before Brown versus Board of Education, before the Civil Rights Act of '64, KKK was still alive and well, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. Now it's about 14%. You can't blame it on poverty. You can't blame it on racism. It is the breakdown of the nuclear intact family, and neither side is talking about it. The left doesn't talk about it because they caused it with the welfare state, and our side does not talk about it because if you're white, you'll be accused of dissing single moms who are heroically raising these kids, or you'll be accused of being a racist, or if you're black, you'll be accused, as I was by the LA Times, of being the black face of white supremacy.
Facts.
Nobody's talking about that. I am.
What are the reasons, if your statistics are right, what are the reasons that you think fathers aren't in the home?
As I said, it's because in the mid-'60s, Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. In Charlemagne, literally, they sent social workers door to door in the inner city. I remember this, advising women of the availability of welfare provided there was no man in the house. It created an economic incentive for women to marry the government. Same thing with whites. In 1965, 8% of whites entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Now it's about 25%, also up threefold. Look at census data, 1910, 1920, 1930, in places like Milwaukee, Chicago, Philadelphia, a young black kid was slightly more likely to be brought into a world with a father in the home married to the mother than a young white kid. We have incentivized this kind of bad behavior, and it's had a disproportionately bad effect on the black community.
Let me ask you a question. What do white people do wrong?
This guy's Charlemagne the God is a clown, right? Imagine listening to all those facts and statistics that was thrown out there by Larry Elder to support his thesis that fatherlessness is the biggest problem in this country, right? And he clearly outlines how this has not only had a negative effect on black people, but also on white people as well, too. However, we're not seeing this issue be as bad as it is among white people as it is with black people in regards to the effects of it. Okay, he outlines why this is the issue and what were the causes of it. Okay, nothing but facts. And the first thing that Charlemagne the God can think about in regards to a follow-up question, or the second thing, is, well, what did white people do wrong? Right? What did white people do wrong? What did white man do? Again, see, this is what I'm talking about right here. This is the real slave mentality right here, right? You don't have the ability to reflect on anything in regards to the problems in black America without trying to blame the white man. Somewhere, somehow, the white man is the problem, and you got to talk about how, well, the white man had something to do with it, right? Again, it's funny how that works.
Larry Elder.
What do you mean, what do white people do? I'm not worried about white people. I'm worried about what's going on with us.
But if there's systemic racism in this country, which we know it is.
No, I don't say there is. You say there is. I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't believe there's
No,
systemic
there
racism?
used to be, obviously. Tell me what you think the number one systemic example of systemic racism is in America.
Oh, man, there's so many.
Just give me the most important one you think.
But at the top of mind, I'd probably maybe say mass incarceration. Maybe.
Really? During the Great Depression, when 50% of black adults were unemployed, you didn't have this kind of mass incarceration. It's the breakdown of the family.
I'm not going to. I agree with the family part. I'm a black man who is a father to his children, and I'm a happily married black man to a black woman. So I'm never going to argue with that part, But I just feel like everything is black with you. Black is wrong. Black people do this and black people do that. And when I ask you what white people do wrong, you said you're not worried about white people at all.
I'm talking.
Again, it's just so hilarious how, because they got to pander to a certain audience, right? You can't come up here and have a conversation where you're talking about black issues and you're simply just trying to hold other black people accountable without bringing a white man into the mix. Which again is funny because, these people are supposed to be all about black, right? Everything with them is black, right? Everything about these people is black, except when it comes to talking about holding black people responsible for the problems in the black community. All of a sudden, it's not about black anymore. It's about white, right? The white man is what you got to talk about, okay? Which it's hilarious because I think that Larry Elder had a great response. He's like, look, I'm not worried about the white man, right? I'm not worried about the white man. I'm worried about black folks. Which, again, that to me, in my opinion, right, I think the most effective thing that black people can do is stop worrying about white people and to worry about black people. And this is what these people typically advocate for. When they're out here talking about black empowerment, black this, black that, right, basically pushing for segregation, they're all on board with, hey, let's just worry about ourselves, right? It's just us. We don't need to worry about the white man, except when it comes to talking about the issues and the problems and who's the cause of the problems. Now, all of a sudden, it ain't all about just us anymore. Hey, we need to start blaming the white man, right? It's the white man's fault. It's amazing. This guy, Charlemagne the God, he's so caught up in his race narrative.
About the damage, disproportionate damage going on in the black community. For example, look at these smash and grabs that are taking place in Los Angeles, where I live. There's a suburb called Glendale where at a mall recently, a mob of 30 to 40 people, they had masks on, but one guy got popped. He was black. And I think most of those who were doing this were black. And in recent years and times, there have been a number of these in places like Chicago, places like New York. If I were involved in something like that, Charlemagne, I grew up with a dad, just as you're raising your own children. I would have been more afraid of my father than I would about the cops catching me. These kids are afraid of neither. They don't have a father in the home. Cops are demoralized. They're pulling back. Their manpower is short. And as a result, you tell a bad guy you're less likely to be caught, convicted, incarcerated, crime goes up. They may be criminals, but they're not stupid. Mm-hmm. When you say, what do white people do? I mean, this is a country that has struggled mightily to get over its historic racism. There was a civil war. There was a big civil rights movement. This is the only majority white country that's ever elected a black president, let alone reelected a black president. The three biggest cities in America are New York, Chicago, L.A. They all have black mayors.
And they're, shitholes, right? Again, I pointed this out the other day in my video. It's like all of these places where you're seeing this crime, this chaos, this destruction, they're run by black people, right? Black people are running the cities, and these cities also have a large black population. But and look at the results. Again, the woke revolutionaries are getting what they want. They're getting their black leadership, right? They're getting their black representation. But it seems to me, the more of that you get, the worse things become. And I'm not saying it's because they're black, it's because they're liberal, right? That's the real issue. But in regards to the problems in the black community, a vast majority of the problems are self-inflicted. Okay, now if you want to blame the white man, which they're going to get to this in a minute, yeah, you can blame the liberal white man, right, and the liberal white man's policies, okay, if you really want to place some blame on the white man, but a vast majority of the issues are self-inflicted. When you see these murders, a vast majority of murders against black people committed against black people. I mean, a vast majority of murders, period, are committed by black people. But I'm just saying, crimes, the suffering that is going on in black community, it is self-inflicted. Self-inflicted. But that's an issue that these people severely just don't want to talk about. They don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to address it. And this is why a lot of these people look like fools when they come out here and they want to blame the white man and talk about systemic racism when everybody can see with their own two eyes that, well, most of the people that's committing crimes against black folks that's hurting black people are black, right? A lot of these cities are being ran by black people. What are you talking about? How can you blame the white man when a vast majority of these cities, you can name any one, Baltimore, Atlanta, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, these places are being ran by black folks, right? They're being ran by black people, Memphis. So it's laughable. You get laughed at behind closed doors when you come out here and you want to talk about what a white man is, the white man that. When everybody can see with their own two eyes that a vast majority of the issues are self-inflicted. If black people can get out of their own way, right? If black people weren't committing the crimes against each other at the rate that we do, the murders against each other at the rates that we do, if everything wasn't so self-inflicted, maybe, just maybe, people would say, okay, well, maybe we can take you a little bit more serious when you talk about, well, why black people, still behind or whatever. Maybe you can start to talk about the white liberals, right? Maybe we can eventually get to that, okay? But until we, actually stop self-inflicting most of the damage on the black community, we can't really start to blame anybody else until we get to that point.
Even though no city has a majority of black population, the president of Harvard is a black female. Martin Luther King in 1966, Charlemagne, gave an interview to the BBC. This is 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64 got passed. And he said, I'm amazed at how many positive changes there have been in America in the last 2 years. Why, if things keep going like this, we could have a black president in about 40 years' time. Mm-hmm. Do the math. Right on cue, Barack Obama elected 2008. He didn't say there'll be a black female president of Harvard, and there has been. He didn't say there are going to be black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and there have been several. He didn't say the percentage of the House would equal the percentage of black people in the population, and it does. He didn't say the 3 largest cities would have black mayors, and they do. He didn't say the largest and most prestigious organization of doctors, the American Medical Association, would have 2 black presidents, and there have been. He didn't say the most prestigious organization of lawyers, the American Bar Association, would have 2 black presidents, and they have. He said president, meaning at that point, I can feel that I've reached the mountaintop, which is the speech he gave right before he got assassinated the day before. And now we act as if Barack Obama never even got elected. And we're still talking about systemic racism. It's not fair. It's wrong. And you're discouraging black people from working hard. 1990s.
Okay. Mr. Elder, quick question. Let's just remove the word racism, since that seems to be a word that triggers, a conversation down the water hole. Let's just focus on the word system.
This woman.
You mentioned that the system was the one that discouraged. And again, we have no problem with agreeing that the family, the black family, should certainly has some room for some improvement. But let's just focus on system.
Room for improvement?
System. Well, we're not going to go down that water. We're not going to go down that water hole. Let's get to the question. So the question is, you said that the system encouraged black women to be single mothers, correct?
I said the welfare state, yes.
The welfare, the system. So who's in charge of the system? Who was in charge of the system?
Well, it was Democrats that passed it.
And who were Democrats? Were they black or white at that time?
Well, at the time, majority of black people were Democrats, as the majority of black people are Democrats now.
Not the voters. I'm talking about the system. Remember, the main idea is the word system. Who was in charge of the system at the time? The Democrats at the time, the system. I'm just going to Charlamagne's point about white or black. Was it white Democrats in charge of the system or black Democrats in charge of the system?
Well, if you're prepared to say that Lyndon Johnson did this viciously with an intent to destroy the black family, I disagree. He did it with the best of intentions. And if you look at the New York Times, which is left wing, the Washington Post, which is left wing, they cheered all of this.
Right. And what I'm asking was, it white people, so I'm going to ask again in case my mic's not coming through clearly. Was it white people in charge of the system or black people in charge of that system that helped break down the black family? It's a simple yes, just a simple question, white or black?
Well, you didn't have to go on welfare unless you voluntarily chose to go on welfare. The inducement was put there by Democrats, by the left.
Correct? Okay. Democrats,
most black people were Democrats, and they voted for these white people
Not
too.
voters. I said who's in charge of the system.
Well, who puts them in charge?
Was Lyndon Johnson white or black?
Who put them in charge?
Maybe that'll help you.
Fine. Lyndon Johnson was white.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, this woman thinks she's so smart, and she's just not. Like, she always comes off as very confrontational in these interviews, and maybe it's not on purpose. Maybe that's just the way that she talks or whatever, but she does seem very confrontational, particularly towards people who she disagrees with politically. But the point that Larry Elder is making that she doesn't seem to be able to grasp is that ultimately it is the policies of the Democrat Party and culture that is holding down black people in this country, okay? And again, if you want to call that systemic racism, I guess that's on you. But I think that the argument that Larry Elder is making is that this it's not coming from a place of racism, okay? He doesn't believe that Lyndon B. Johnson had nefarious reasons. I think that he believes that Lyndon B. Johnson did it with the best of intentions, which again, we can disagree with, right? Some people do think it was nefarious, but it is a policy thing. It's a Democrat policy thing, right? In the sense that I think personally that they did it because dependency is good for Democrats, right? It's good for votes, okay? You get more votes, the more dependent you make people on the government, right? And I think that's the reason why they did it. I don't think they did it because they were like, oh, well, we are white supremacists and we want to be racist against black people and yada, yada, yada. No, I do think that they probably did it thinking that, hey, we are going to solve poverty. We are going to make people's lives better. And we're also going to make them dependent on the government as well, too. And that's going to help us get votes. I think that that's probably the reasons. And I wouldn't necessarily call that systemic racism because I don't think that racism was the intention, right? Just because a policy is enacted by a large group of people who happen to be white and has a disproportionately negative effect on black people doesn't mean that it was racist, right? Or that racism was the intent, okay? Because again, there's a lot of policies being enacted in these liberal cities that are run by black people that are negatively affecting black people. And I'm sure these people wouldn't call that systemic racism, right? They would just call it bad policy, right? They just made a bad policy decision. But again, if they want to run with this idea that, hey, white people are in charge of the system and any, policy that disproportionately affects black people negatively is systemic racism. And we know that the people that are enacting these policies, at least the ones that, Larry Elder are arguing is the cause of, or contributed to the state of the black community today. We know they're white liberals. If we want to go with that, fine, right? If you want to go with that systemic racism, fine. But now you have to acknowledge and admit that, okay, well, black people are voting for systemic racism, right? Which is kind of what Larry Elder was getting at, right? Who are you voting for? You're voting for systemic racism that you're complaining about so much, because we both agree, right, that, hey, white liberals were in charge, right? White Democrats. So again, if y'all want to have that systemic racism argument and call it systemic racism, cool. But black people are voting for it, right? So who really takes responsibility for it? I'm just saying.
But if your argument is that the reason he did it is because of racism, then I disagree. He did it because of
That's not my argument. I just asked you a simple question. Was he white or black? Charlamagne?
And Mr. Elder, you said you talked about the smash and grabs, right? And I find that interesting because when you see the mass shootings that happen, majority of those people are white males. What do you think about that?
Actually, if you look at the percentage of whites in America, which is 60%, the percentage of mass shooters is under that. The percentage of people that commit hate crime is under that. The percentage of people who are serial killers is under that.
That's proportionality, which they're all about when things negatively, disproportionately affect black folks, right? They're all about it. Like, for example, police brutality. They'll tell you all the time, well, it doesn't matter that white people as a whole, in terms of just a raw number, are killed by cops more. It's that black people are killed by cops more disproportionately. That's what they'll say. That's the argument, right? To prove the so-called systemic racism. They don't want to use raw numbers. But when it comes to other types of crimes, now all of a sudden they want to use raw numbers to fit the narrative, and they don't want to talk about proportionality. Who's proportionally committing more of the crimes? They don't want to talk about it. It goes out the window. They use it very selectively. Right? The same way when it comes to affirmative action, they don't want affirmative action when it comes to the NBA or the NFL that is majority black, okay, and that black people disproportionately make up these teams, right? They don't want to use that. Apparently that goes out the window, right? There are more black people in the NFL and the NBA versus the actual population. Nah, they don't want to talk about that. But when it comes to college, though, oh, no. There's less black people in college than the population number. So that means that there's a problem. There's an issue, right? We need to fix it. The proportionality ain't right. Again, it's amazing how they're so selective about that, right? They're so selective about it.
Black people are 13% of the population. We commit a greater percentage compared to that
but no,
of
you
mass
specifically
shootings.
talked about the smash and grabs, though. So I was saying, since you're using that as an example, I'm saying, well, what about the mass shooters that are usually white males?
One more time. They are usually white males because 60% of the country is white. However, they underrepresent in terms of the number of mass shootings. About 50% or so of the mass shootings in this country are committed by white people, even though white people are 60% of the population. They underrepresent. We overrepresent when it comes to hate crime, when it comes to mass shootings, when it comes to serial killings, when it comes to robberies, when it comes to virtually every category of violent crime. We overrepresent.
So what do white people do wrong? I'm gonna keep asking you that because
Why
does it matter? Why, if you are on the show to talk about black issues, right? What he asks these people every single time, well, what are you doing for black people? I want to just talk about black people. What are you doing for black people, right? When it comes to, hey, what handout are you gonna give for black people? What are you gonna do just for black people? He don't want to talk about what you want to do for whites, right? He don't want to talk about what you want to do for the rest of America. No, he only want to talk about what you want to do for black people. But when it comes to talk about the issues in black community, holding black people accountable, nah, we don't want to talk about black folks. We want to talk about whites, right? We want to talk about what everybody else is doing. Again, it's amazing. The hypocrisy of these people is just off the charts. It really is.
To me, rather than deal with what's going on, the pathology that's going on in the inner city, you want me to talk about how bad white people are, which I don't think is a particularly productive thing to do.
Well, I think there's a cause and effect, but if we can't talk about the cause, which I believe is systemic racism and white supremacy, the FBI says.
Well, I just told you, if it's systemic racism, please explain to me how it was when America really had systemic racism in 1940. 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. Again, this is during Jim Crow era. My father is from Athens, Georgia, grew up in Jim Crow. My mom is from Huntsville, Alabama, grew up in Jim Crow. 87% of blacks live below the poverty line. This is before Brown versus Board of Education. You did not find these kind of black on black crime.
Probably because we had no
choice. But they still were living
below
the poverty line, though, sir.
I'm sorry?
You're forgetting the fact that they were still living below the poverty line. You're picking and choosing, saying this was good, but this was bad.
Okay.
The bottom line, they end between the poverty line. But let's move forward
you want to move forward because his whole point is that if poverty is the cause of black people committing all these crimes, if it's the system holding them down, why in the world weren't black people committing crimes at the same rate that they're committing crimes today when we have less poverty overall, right? They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it. Okay. And it's just so hilarious. They have nothing. They have nothing for Larry Elder in these basic facts that this man has come to the show with. They've never heard it before, right? That's why they have nothing for it.
Can I just address that? In 1940, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. 1960, that number had fallen to 47%. That's a 40-point drop in 20 years. That's the greatest 20-year period of economic expansion for black people in the history of America. Again, well before Brown versus Board of Education, well before the KKK imploded, well before we had race-based preferences. Why? Because it was rare for a black kid to be raised in a family without a father in the home. A strong belief in Judeo-Christian values, a belief in patriotism, even as America wasn't applying these values to black people, obviously, and a belief in entrepreneurship. All those things are now under assault by organizations like Black Lives Matter. Charlemagne, Black Lives Matter had on their website an attack on the nuclear family. The founders are self-described Marxists, trained Marxists. Marx wanted to dethrone God, was an atheist, and Marx did not believe in capitalism, let alone entrepreneurship. All the things that made black people still survive in virulent racism are now under attack by organizations like Black Lives Matter.
All of those things have always been under attack by white supremacy. You can go back to things like whether it's the Tulsa race massacres, like every time black people do create these systems that are our systems and we are the entrepreneurs, it seems like white supremacy finds a way to destroy it.
Every time, look, the Tulsa massacre, within about 5 years,
was rebuilt.
That whole area was rebuilt. It was not even called the Black Wall Street until after it was rebuilt. It was rebuilt, by the way, by black people without one dime of government money.
Yeah, but who destroyed it to begin with?
It was racists who destroyed it. No question about it.
We've
had race riots, but so have Japanese.
So you do agree that there's racism? I'm just so confused.
He already told you that there's racism. He said there's racism back when we actually were experiencing racism. And yes, there's racism today, but it's not nearly as prevalent and it does not have as much of an effect on people's lives. These people are so dense. Why even go on this show, bro? I don't understand. This show is the worst.
Never even came close to saying. I never came close to saying there was no racism.
You just saying you don't think it's systemic racism.
Not anymore. Obviously, there was. We had something called slavery. We had something called Jim Crow.
That destroyed black. Hold on, sir. That was system that destroyed. That was the system that destroyed Black Wall Street. It's the same system right now that's not even wanting to pay those same living descendants. Because I know your position on reparations, but those same living descendants of Black Wall Street.
Okay.
And then you move, and then you go on to say that the system, the quote unquote system, is also trying to destroy President Trump. So I'm just so confused on: do you believe that the system can destroy or not? You pick and choose, sir, and that's what's so confusing to me. You just said it wasn't racism. Now it is racism. When it was time to build it back, there was no racism.
I said it wasn't systemic racism. Let's talk about.
Yeah. So no, you're the people. You just don't get it. You're not smart enough to understand what this man is saying because you don't have anything for what he's saying. Okay. They have nothing. But yeah. Y'all can watch the rest of that. I just wanted to react to that part of it because that was just wow. Right? That was just wow. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.